Now let's look at another example that processes data from the input buffer. In case number 3, we are going to do the following. We want to ignore the first 3 characters and then read the time. So embedded into our input, we have a time which starts at this position here. So the 4th character would be a time like in hours and then minutes and then seconds. And then there's some other stuff afterwards. So the purpose of this particular case is to extract the time and print that out separately. To do that, we need to take care of these first 3 characters some way, and that's where ignore comes in. All right, so let's go ahead and write the code for that. We begin by ignoring the first 3 characters, and that introduces the ignore function. So as the get function worked, so does ignore. So we do cin.ignore. And then in parentheses, you can specify how many characters to ignore. So in this case, we want to ignore 3 characters, and we put the semicolon there. And when you use ignore, it's going to take the information from the input buffer, and it will ignore exactly that many characters. Those characters are not saved anywhere. Once you ignore them, they are gone, and you cannot get them back. So after we do the ignore, then the input buffer is just going to contain the remaining information that I'm highlighting here. So let's just make a little comment and let's type that in. The input buffer now contains, and I'll just copy and paste what it still has in it. So we'll copy that and we'll paste it here. So the ignore function allows you to ignore as many characters as you want on input. In a case like this, it's very handy because we don't care about the QXR. We want to jump ahead and we want to get the time. So we can do that easily by using the ignore function. Now that we are located over here and the next character in the input buffer is the 0, then let's go ahead and remove the time. And I just want to move the time, take the time out and print it to the screen. We can do that 1 character at a time. So I want to stop when we get to this uppercase U over here. So let's write a loop that we can use for that. So let's write a while loop, while, and I can use any of the variables I've declared up above, these character variables, ch1 through ch5. I can use any of those, so I'm just going to use ch1. So while ch1 is not equal to an uppercase U, and we need a single quote here, single quote, uppercase U, single quote, because a character has to match a character. So you don't want to use double quotes. That would make it a string. Then we will continue to read the time from the input buffer and print that to the screen. So there we have the curly braces. And we can use get to read 1 character at a time. So cin.get, and we'll use ch1 again here. Then we have a semicolon. So that reads 1 character at a time from the input buffer. Then we will print that back out. So we'll do a cout ch1. And again, I'm not going to do an end line because I want all these characters to appear on the same line. After we exit the loop, then I want to do the end line here. Then there's something else that will happen. Once I reach the letter U, then I want to stop. So that means there's still information that's left in the input buffer. Okay, so if I look down here, after we ignore 3, we still have all that in the input buffer. I want to remove the time and print that out, but then there's still extra stuff left in the input buffer. So to visualize what's still in there, let's do a get line to read the rest of that out. So we can do a get line cin remainder. So we can do the remainder. Then we'll go ahead and let's print that out to the screen. Okay, cout, double quote, the input buffer contains, and then space, and we'll print out remainder with an end line. Then let's run the program and see what we get. Here's the output. So we are supposed to enter this data exactly as shown, and You can type it in, or if you want to just use copy and paste, you can. If you're running Windows, you can do a Control-C to copy. Control-V will paste it back in, so that means I didn't have to type all that in. Then I'll hit the Enter key, and it goes into the input buffer, and it's processed by our program. So here's the output. Well, okay, I get the first 3 characters I removed with ignore, so they are no longer in the input buffer at all. Then I go into the loop, and I want to get the time and print that out. So here's what we get. I get 3, 30, 15, but I also get the letter U. Now, I really only wanted to get the time. I didn't want to get the letter U. So we'll look at how we can fix that in case number 4. But I did read the letter U. That means the remainder that of data in the input buffer is 150.33. So that's what shows up here. And we got that by using the get line and then printing out the remainder to the screen. So once again, the output from this program, we discard the 3 leading characters with ignore. Then we use a loop to read 1 character at a time to get the time until we encounter the letter U. In this case, we read the letter U, and then we exited the loop. After the loop, we did a get line, and we printed out the remainder, and that's what you see here, 150.33. Well, let's move on and look at case number 4, and we'll introduce the peek command, and it gives us an opportunity or a different way to take care of the situation where we didn't want to read in the letter U. We want to stop when we get to the letter U. Now, you know already that we could reconstruct this while loop so that we didn't actually read in the U. So that could be done, but I did this on purpose because I wanted to show you peek in case number 4. So let's scroll down to case number 4. I'll take the system pause, and I'm going to pull it down to here, right before case number 5. And since I'm going to be moving on to case number 4, then I'm going to erase what I did in case number 3 eventually. But the first thing I want to do is I want to copy some of that and paste it down here. Well, what is case number 4? It starts out the same way. Ignore the first 3 characters, and then here's something new. Peek at each one until the U is reached. All right, well, what is this peek thing all about? Well, this will introduce peek and show you one way that you can use it. This example is very much like example 3, so let's go ahead and get the ignore. We'll use that in case number 4. So this will ignore the first 3 characters like it did in case number 3. Now we have the time, and I want to read the time and print it out, but I do not want to get the letter U this time. So how do we do that? Well, in order to do that, we can use something that's different, and we write it a bit differently than we've been doing with get and ignore. The way we use peek is like this. You specify some character variable, so like we can use ch2, and we use cin.peek over here, and then we have empty parentheses. So the syntax is a little bit different. So what happens here is when we're looking at the input buffer with peek, we inspect the character and we make a copy of it, but we do not read it. Okay, so that's the really important thing here. So write the comment, we want to inspect the next character in the input buffer, but we do not read it. That's very important. We just leave it alone, but do not read it. Okay, so it does not pull it out of the input buffer. Now, let's rewrite our loop to read in just the time and print that to the screen. So the while loop is almost the same as before, except I'm using ch2 this time. So while ch2 is not equal to single quote, uppercase U, single quote, then I want to stay in the loop. we have set ch2 with peek up here, so we have not actually read the character from the input buffer. Let's put the curly braces in. So we want to read it. Okay, if ch2, if it's not equal to the u, then we want to read that in, and we can do that with get. So cin.get ch2, so that'll read in a character. Then I want to print that back to the screen. Okay, cout ch2 with a semicolon. Again, I'm not printing them on separate lines. I want them all to be on one line. Now, before I read the next character, I want to look at the character to determine whether or not it's a U. So I am going to peek at that next character. So ch2 is equal to cin.peek with empty parentheses. So again, this is going to inspect the next character in the input buffer. Well, let's see what's in the input buffer at this point. So we have eliminated the QXR with ignore. Then we want to peek at the next character. The next character is 0. So 0 here is not equal to the U, so we go in the loop. Then we want to get the character. Okay, so the get actually removes a character from the input buffer. Okay, that reads a character from the input buffer. Then we can print that character back to the screen. But before moving on and testing ch2 again, I want to peek at the next character. So after I've read the 0, then I'm going to peek at the next one, which is a 3. Well, that's not a U, so I'll stay in the loop and I'll read the character and then print it out and peek at the next one. So eventually we work our way all the way over to the letter U. Okay, so when I print out the 5, the next letter is U. So when we peek at it right here, then a copy of that letter U is stored in ch2. Then when we come back to the top of the loop, then we exit the loop at that point. So we don't read the U, we don't print the U. So that's what peek allows us to do. That's one example. Now afterwards, let's go ahead and write our end of line as we did before. And since there's still information that is in the input buffer, then we can use our get line and read the rest of that data out. So I'll copy these 2 lines and I'll print them down here. So then we can see what's left over in the input buffer after this loop terminates. Now let's pause the program. In fact, one thing more, I don't want to run case 3 and then run case 4. So I'm going to go ahead and delete case number 3 so we don't have to type information in twice. So let's get rid of that and we'll just work with case number 4. Now let's compile the program and run. Now we have the output window. So this is case number 4. We want to ignore the first 3 characters. We want to peek at each one until the letter U is discovered. And when we see the letter U, we want to exit the loop. All right, so I'm going to copy and paste this data. So there's the input. I'll hit enter. That all goes into the input buffer. Now you can see that we output only the time, 3, 30, 15, and the input buffer still contained the U with the 150.33 afterwards. So peek gives you the opportunity to inspect something in the input buffer without actually having to read it. Also, peek, since it doesn't read in anything, if we were to repeatedly do a peek operation, then we would see the same character over and over again. So it doesn't move along in the input buffer, it leaves the input buffer unchanged. It just makes a copy of the next character, which would be the one on the left-hand side, and then it saves it in whatever variable you want to put here. So that's how peek works. Peek can only read one character, and that's all. So you can't look any further than one character ahead. Now, let's move on to case number 5, and we'll look at what's called a putback operation. This allows us to put information back into the input buffer. So let's make some edits to our program, and we'll look at case number 5. Well, let's begin by looking at what we, the whole object of case number 5. And this says we want to extract the time, leaving the rest of the data in the input buffer. Wow. All right, so we want to get the time 03:30:15, but I want to leave everything else in there. When I'm done with this example, I want the input buffer to contain the QXR U15033. So that's what I want to do. How are we going to do that? Well, we can start out the same way that we did with cases 3 and 4. We need to get over to the time, but we need to do it in a way that we can save those first 3 characters. So let's just use get this time to read and save those first 3 characters. So we can do cin.get ch1. Okay, so that, let's make a comment here. So that will get the letter Q. Then we will read in 3 other ones, or 2 other ones. So let's save those in ch2, and that will get the letter X. Then in ch3, we'll get the other letter, which is R. Now, you know already that when we do a get, it removes that character from the input buffer. So after we read those, we're left with the information highlighted here, starting with the time. Now, we can use the information that we had, or the while loop that we used previously, in order to read in the time and print that out to the screen. So let's take a look at. So it'll be pretty much identical, but I can't use ch2 because I'm using it right here. So let's go ahead and let's peek. So let's do a ch2 is, let's do ch4. All right, ch4 has not been used. ch4 is equal to cin.peek. So this will look at the next character in the input buffer. Then we can go into our while loop. So while ch4 is not equal to the single quote uppercase U, then we can read the time and we can print that out to the screen. So the inside of the while loop is going to look the same, cin.get, except we'll do ch4. Then we'll output that to the screen. Okay, cout ch4 with the semicolon, and then we'll peek at the next one. So we'll use peek again. ch4 is equal to cin.peek, empty parentheses, and that will terminate the loop. So this loop then is just going to start with our first digit of time, 03, and it will plow through until it finds the letter U, and it prints everything out to the screen. Now, when we get to this point, the input buffer is going to have the U15033, just like it did in case number 4. But I wanted to return the letters that we read in the front. I want to return the Q, the X, and the R to the input buffer. So the putback function lets you put information back into the input buffer. So let's do our cout end line here after the loop. Then let's put the characters back. So the way putback works is cin.putback, and then in parentheses you list the character that you want to put back. Well, we want to put them back in the order that we took them out. So the last one that came out was R, that's ch3. So we'll put back ch3 at this point. And it might be a good idea to put comments here indicating what's left in the input buffer. So let's, after the loop, let's put a comment here. The input buffer contains, and the only thing it contains after the loop is the last part of this starting with the U. So I'll just copy and paste that in here. And what we want to do is we pulled out the time. We want to put the Q, X, and R back in front of this thing. So we'll do a putback ch3, and let's just update our comment. I'll copy the comment, paste it here. Now the input buffer contains, after the putback, we have put back the letter R. So now the R has been pushed back on the left-hand side. Now we can do the same thing if we put back ch2 and ch1. So I copied and paste. We'll put back ch2 and we'll put back ch1. So now, after we do a put back for ch2, the input buffer is going to contain the letter X. And then after we put back, let's put the X here, then after we put back ch1, then the Q is here. Then we have returned characters to the input buffer. So that's a pretty powerful operation that you have. So in this case, we have preserved all the information in the input buffer, but we have extracted the time part and printed that out to the screen. Now, to prove that we have left this information in the input buffer, let's read it with getLine and let's print it back out to the screen. And we can go borrow the 2 lines of code that we've already written for that from the previous case, and we can paste that in here. So we'll get the remainder, and then we'll print that out to the screen, and you'll see it will be that information right there. We no longer need to go through case number 4, so I am going to delete case number 4. And in my example, you can keep it in yours if you'd like, but I don't want to have to type in all the information twice. So I'm just going to delete it from there, and I need to move the system pause down as well. Okay, so let's move it down right before case 6. Now, let's compile the program and let's run the program. Now the program's running, so let's copy and paste this information. Control-C copies, Control-V pastes. Then I'll hit Enter. So we do get the time extracted. So we have read the first 3 characters, the Q, the X, and the R. We read those in with get. So we read them in, we saved them in those 3 variables. Then we had the while loop, which goes through and it pulls out all the time information and prints that to the screen. It stopped at the letter U. Then we wanted to return the 3 characters in the front to the input buffer, and the putback operation does that. After we have returned those 3 characters, we will get everything else in the input buffer and we'll print that out. So now the output shows you that we do have the U15033 that was left over after the time, so that's still in there. But by doing the putback, we have returned the Q, the X, and the R to the input buffer in the front or the left-hand side. So now that's still in there, and the U15033 is still in there, but the time has been extracted. So that's what putback can do for you. Now, let's look at one other thing on putback before we go any further. You can also put back information that was never in the input buffer to begin with. So let's insert some other characters. Okay, so let's insert the letters G and M to the input buffer. Well, you can use putback to do that. So we can do cin.putback. Then you can actually put a character here. So I can use a single quote, and if I want to put the letter G in there, then I can do that. So this will insert G into the input buffer. Insert G into input buffer. Then we can do the same thing if we want to insert another character, like the letter M. So you can also do this. So you can add information back into the input buffer that was not typed into it from the keyboard. So let's run this program and you'll see that now we'll have the G and the M also added back into our input buffer, and we'll pull it out with the get line and print it back to the screen. So I'll compile and run the program again. Now the program's running. So as we've done before, I'll type in this information. I'll copy it and paste it again. And then I hit enter. So now the program still does what it was supposed to do. It pulls out the time. But now, in addition to putting back in the letters Q, X, and R, the putback G and the putback M has added 2 more letters to the front of the input buffer. So you can use putback to insert information back into the input buffer, but you have to do it one character at a time. So putback uses one character. In this case, we have the character m. This can be a variable as well. As you see, we used variables up here. So as long as that's a character, then you can add things back into the input buffer. The last case in this example is case number 6. So we want to read in the input using cin this time. So we're going to kind of go backward, and we're going to use cin, but we're going to mix in some of the other functions that I've shown you in this example. So let's go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to erase case number 5 because I don't want to have to type all that in. So let's take that out, and I'll take out the pause as well because we're at the end. This is the last one, so number 6. Notice at the top I have some variables for the hours, minutes, and the seconds. So I want to read through and I want to get out the hours, minutes, and seconds, but I want to use cin this time in order to do that. So how do I do that? Well, I'll still get the QX and R happening over here at the beginning. So I need to get rid of that. So there's several ways I can do it. You know, if I wanted to, I could use a cin.get and just read them in and just, you know, discard them or not use them, or I could use an ignore. So let's do that. Let's use the ignore. Let's do cin.ignore 3. Okay, so that removes the Q, X, and R from the input buffer. All right, so now that I've removed those, then I can use ordinary cin to read in the hours. And did I spell that out, or is it abbreviated? So it's HRS. Okay, so I can read in hours. And then I've got this colon to worry about. Okay, so I could read that in as a character and then just ignore it, or I could stop here and I could do another ignore 1. So there's several ways I could do that. So in this case, I'm just going to read it in as a character, just put it in ch1. Then I'm going to read in the minutes. Okay, then I'm going to read in the ch1 again, which is going to be that colon, the second colon between the 30 and the 15. So I'll read that in. And then we have hours, minutes. The next thing is going to be the seconds. And it's seconds. I did spell that one out. And then a semicolon there. So what's left now in the input buffer is just going to be the U15033. So let's review this just a bit. Okay, after I read in, well, after I'll ignore 3, so that removes the QX and the R. Now what's remaining is the 03, colon, 30, and so on. When I read in hours, then hours is a type unsigned integer. So when I read in the hours, that reads in the 0 and the 3. So it reads both of those things because those are integers. It stops, you know, cin will stop when it sees something that doesn't match the type. So a colon is not an integer, so it reads in the hours and it stops at the colon. Then we read the colon with ch1, and now we're at the 30. Okay, well, minutes, that's also an unsigned integer. So 3 is an unsigned integer, 0 is an unsigned integer, so it reads the 30. So it does read 2 characters again. Okay, then it stops because colon is not an integer. And then we read that, and then we read seconds. Seconds is an unsigned integer, so it reads the 1 and the 5. And then it stops because the U is not an unsigned integer. So that's the way cin works. After all this is done, then what's left is this, and the question is, you know, what do we really want to do with it? Well, let's try this. I've got some string data up here, in data, remainder, and I've been using getLine to read that in, but I can also do a cin. I can do cin remainder and semicolon, and this would read everything else until it reaches the end of line. So this is a string, and when you read in a string, then if you have no spaces in here, then it keeps going until it reaches the end of that line, which is marked by an end of line character. So here is an example where we can also use cin to read in the information as well. So now that we've read in everything, we need to print that back out to the screen. So let's do cout, and let's print out hours, and let's print out minutes, and let's do a set width to 3 so we have some space between them. And then we'll do minutes, and then let's output the seconds. So let's do a set width to 3, and let's print out seconds, and let's do an end line here. And then on the next line, let's print out the remainder. So let's do cout remainder, end line, and it will show us what we had left over after we read in the time. So now let's compile and run the program. Here's the output. So let's copy our input information and paste it, hit enter, and the output shows up here. All right, so we have the hours, and we have the minutes, we have the seconds, so you can see that. So we threw away the QX and the R with the ignore. Then we use cin to read the time, hours, minutes, and seconds, and I printed those back out. And then we use cin remainder, and it picked up everything else that was in the input buffer. Okay, so since there were no spaces there, it got everything as a type string, and we did print that back out to the screen. So you have a lot of options, a lot of different ways that you can do input. And the C++ language gives you a lot of these features. So this program has covered quite a few of those. And hopefully this is the kind of thing that will help you with getting your input into the program. And of course, you can look back at the manipulators to see how to format things on the output. Okay, so I think that's all we need to do for this program. But I'll tell you what, let's look at one more thing here. When we're reading in the information, let's look at what's left in the input buffer. So let's change this up a little bit. So this removes, the ignore removes the QXR from the input buffer. Okay, so it's going to have the time and everything else. So I'm going to copy that, and let's paste it over here. Okay, so now that's what's in the input buffer. After we read in hours, let's break this up so I can write some comments down here. Okay, so after we use cin, then let's see what's in the input buffer. Okay, input buffer now contains, and when I read in the hours, remember it read in as unsigned integer, so 03. So what's left in the input buffer is everything else. So after this cin hours, the input buffer contains the colon and all that. Then we read in as a character. We just read in ch1. That reads in the colon. So now the input buffer contains this information. Then we want to read in the minutes. Well, the minute shows up here. So that's an unsigned integer. The 30 is an unsigned integer, so that's read in. And after it reads in the minutes, then here is the input buffer contents. After that, we read in a character again. So we'll copy, paste, and ch1 now reads in the colon, so that'll be gone. And then we read in the seconds. Okay, so after we read in the seconds, that's the 1 and the 5. So it stops when it sees the U, so the input buffer only has U150.33 after we read seconds. Then, after we read the remainder, the input buffer is empty. There. So hopefully those comments help to explain what is left in the input buffer each time you do an input operation. All right, so that's good. We will stop the video at this point.